literary legends and luminaries. I'm Julie and welcome to Booksmart. Today's book is a biography about the infamous Edgar Allan Poe. It's called A Mystery of Mysteries, The Death and Life of Edgar Allan Poe by Mark Dewadzwick. Who doesn't like Poe? Even if horror is not your genre, how can we not relate to the Telltale Heart? Hopefully only about guilt and coming clean, not the part about killing someone and dismembering their body and shoving it under the floorboards. Poe is one of those authors that every school child in America is introduced to. Maybe not private religious schools, though. Dawidziak tackles the incredible mystery of Poe's death, the couple months leading up to his death, by flipping back and forth with chapters on Poe's life and then those final weeks before his mysterious death, which I found to be a unique narrative structure that I enjoyed. Before I get more into the book, I must begin by saying that I already knew a lot about Poe already. I liked his stories when I first discovered them in school. The Masque of the Red Death was what was my favorite, a more symbolic story with less of a plot that carries with it a more terrifying reality of the plague. I guess I always fancied stories that had some truth to them. For years, both at the college and high school level, I have taught Poe mostly the Telltale Heart, the Cast of Amontillado, and of course, the Raven. When I was a student, Poe was taught to us as that macabre writer, the inventor of the murder mystery, the drunkard who married his 13-year-old cousin and lost all his beloved women to TB, who then in the end died from mysterious circumstances. And that is the stereotype that Dawidziak attempts to destroy, that Poe was so much more than that. I didn't really delve into Poe's life until I started teaching Poe. Here are two books that I give my students to use when they do this little Poe project in freshman English. I like to give my students books so that they realize a ton of valuable information can be found in such books, that not everything on the internet is reliable or even the best stuff out there. This one is neat as it is put together like a newspaper that's divided into snippets of Poe's life. And then it dedicates 2-page spreads to all his works. Then there's this one, and this one has little pockets of memorabilia in it, which I just love. I don't think you can buy this one anymore. You can only get used copies that are for sale. It wasn't until I started teaching Poe that I realized he was much more than just a Stephen King-like writer. So unlike Dawidziak, I'm going to start with Poe's life rather than his death. Dawidziak, in a relatively short book, does an excellent job at condensing Poe's life into a manageable story that the average reader, no matter how much background information they may already have about Poe, can easily understand and digest. It is a little challenging at times to keep the names straight, but that just might be me, as I've always struggled with names. Otherwise, Dawidziak moves the story of Poe's life along despite the contradictory info that exists. Poe himself didn't keep to the truth when he wrote about his life, so Dawidziak explains such discrepancies. You'll get all the standard information in A Mystery of Mysteries, the consumption that took Poe's motherly figures, mom and girlfriends, his highly dysfunctional relationship with John Allan, the foster dad, so to speak, that was rich but didn't share much with Poe, and Poe's inability to handle alcohol even after only one drink. But our author also does a really good job at revealing Poe's character, like how in one second he could insult you and then the next still ask you for money. While other books have shown Poe's poverty-stricken life, A Mystery of Mysteries seems to capture that element with much more profound details. Dawidziak has pulled from sources and paints a very impoverished home life for Poe in Virginia. At one point, people gave them blankets and coats because they didn't even have enough on their bed to keep them warm. You'll learn about the women who were in love with Poe and how Poe typically self-destructed, mostly from drinking alcohol. Dawidziak weaves in Poe's famous stories and poems throughout, so we have a nice timeline of his writing life as well. I particularly enjoyed how certain stories paralleled his current life experiences, especially with the Cast of Amontillado. Poe was a harsh critic, so engaged in many public, published verbal assaults with other writers. Thomas Dunn English was the person who might have inspired Cast of Amontillado. Poe sued English for defamation and won, but it cost him his time and energy. The Cast of Amontillado is a horrific revenge story just because of insults. How fascinating. I also learned that Poe loved his cat and wrote about him, although that particular cat was never named. Poe used his humor and wit to write some of his scathing reviews. And most intriguing is that Poe may not have just invented the murder mystery genre, but maybe even the genre of true crime. His follow-up to The Murders in the Rue Morgue was The Mystery of Mary Roget, which was based on an actual crime. One of the Mindhunters authors said this about Poe. A detective can't solve a crime until he or she can tell it as a story. In this way, the writer is always the detective. that ultimately Poe used behavioral profiling in his writing long before behavior profiling was a thing. As for Poe's death, Dawidziak does an excellent job at writing the facts that we know and then showing all that we don't know in a comprehensible way. In case you don't know, Poe was found on a bench, not wearing his own clothes, almost dead. He was hospitalized and then died. That's the short of it. Theories have abounded since, anything from rabies to cooping, which is where political people kidnap you and force you to vote over and over again. Dawidziak develops the period of Poe's life from late June 1849 until Poe's death October 7th, 1849. He is excellent at weaving in source material without overwhelming the reader, nor by boring the reader as though we are reading a textbook. He spends a lot of time on the doctor who treated Poe in his final days, John Joseph Moran, changed his story several times, making it grander each time he wrote about it. While Dawidziak doesn't reach any certifiable conclusion regarding Poe's death, he does draw some conclusions. Poe probably did not have rabies, since many people saw him during those last few days. Odds are good that Poe did have tuberculosis, and cooping might have been a viable theory. It didn't kill him, but it could have caused undue stress if he was already sick. Because some of Poe's last days are unaccounted for, he could have very well began drinking again. Throughout the story, Dewadzwick emphasizes Poe as a literary and cultural icon and how Poe's life experiences contributing to his everlasting popularity. Some of these tidbits were the most fascinating part of the book. Let me read you this regarding his foster dad, John Allan. Allan had had enough of Poe asking for money. He was never a warm and loving father figure. Their tumultuous relationship has been revealed through the letters between Poe and Allan. Allan refused to reply to some letters for quite some time. So here's what Dewadzwick has written with the sources he has collected regarding this struggle, this continual struggle that Poe had. If Allan had given Edgar Poe everything he wanted, it's doubtful we would have today the Edgar Allan Poe who has exerted so much influence over so many genres. Allan consigned Poe to a life of struggle, but inadvertently also to one of brilliance. I think the dynamic with John Allan was doomed from the start, said Poe biographer James N. Hutchinson. Poe deluded himself into thinking he would inherit some money and position when John Allan died. He saw himself becoming the comfortable, well-heeled man of letters. And if that had happened, I think we would have largely been a gentleman poet. I think he also would have written essays and letters, but it's entirely possible and probably likely that he wouldn't have written the mystery and horror stories. There would have been no need to exploit a popular genre. There would have been no financial incentive to write the stories that have kept him alive. Struggle is key to Poe's productivity and his development as a writer, said author Daniel Stashauer. So much of what he wrote was forged in adversity, including the horror and mystery stories. He's being shaped by struggle. You take away that struggle and we don't know what would have happened, but he's definitely not the Poe we know. What a fascinating theory, especially when you consider how writers are always shaped by their experiences. Another aspect of this legacy deals with the scathing obituary written by Rufus Griswold, who painted a horrible picture of Poe as an arrogant, envious, cynical, and just all-out horrible man. The public loves these salacious details, which seems to have a much longer shelf life than the more uninteresting truth. Let me read you this and see if you agree with this assessment of what that horrible obituary did for Poe's legacy. So his obituary and biography kind of jump-starts the fascination with Poe with all this sordid gossip and nonsense. It really captured the public's imagination. But that rascal, Griswold, really did stick it to Poe. Or as Larry Lee Poe put it, his biggest mistake was dying before his enemies. Griswold's determined campaign to blacken Poe's reputation ultimately backfired in two ways. First, as Jerome points out, his falsehoods, as persistent as they proved to be, did end up making Poe more intriguing to one generation after another. Second, as the extent of his lies and forgeries came to light, Griswold was cast as the black-hearted villain, driven by jealousy, resentment, and blind hatred. The bitter irony for Griswold would have been the knowledge that, without Poe, nobody would be talking about him today. He also created a character for himself, that of the wretched literary assassin. In his own ongoing efforts to reduce Poe, he reduced himself. And so what they're saying is Griswold has kind of disappeared into the literary world, but thanks to his obituary, Poe is front and center. Would Poe have disappeared into that literary abyss with Griswold had it not been for such an obituary? We'll never know. Finally, Dewadzwick shows us today, in our current times of social media and social strife, that Poe is even more applicable, that what he's writing about relates more to our times than to his times. Let me read you this. Poe really anticipated the feel for our time even more than Twain did, he said. Poe is alive to our culture today and to readers today in ways that he wasn't alive to readers in his lifetime. Poe was so far ahead of his own time in terms of intuiting changes that were already happening in the culture. And a lot of that has to do with the atrocities of the 20th century. The Holocaust, the terrible wars, the inventions of mass destruction. We are now properly in a place where Poe resonates. A reader in the 2020s instantly understands the Masque of the Red Death and gets the sense of entrapment and fatality in the claustrophobic effect that Poe creates. That's where the quarantine put us. We are trapped, and we have people bidding defiance to contagion. The glow of the fireside poets failed to warm a world coping with the cold realities of a new century. Their light faded as we became less sure of comforting messages and more intrigued by Poe's troubling questions. We recognize Poe's modern view of the dark side of humanity, said Jeffrey A. Savoy of the Edgar Allan Poe Society of Baltimore. We don't expect sentimental moralizing, so we've embraced the very thing that made Poe distasteful in his own era. I know that I love when old stories have universal appeal, that the time in which they were written still applies today. I do think that Poe's stories have a timeless quality to them. I would highly recommend Dawidziak's A Mystery of Mysteries if you are a Poe fan. If you are a biography fan, I would recommend it as well. If you are a fan of literature and wonder about how stories become stories or how stories long outlive their writers, A Mystery of Mysteries is for you too. If you're a fan of the horror genre or the mystery genre or the true crime genre, you should read A Mystery of Mysteries. This biography does a lot more than just tell about Poe's life. It speaks more to his legacy, to why, after more than 180 years, we still read Poe. I will end this episode of Booksmart with the end of A Mystery of Mysteries, as it is so fitting to Poe and his life. Fashions in dead authors come and go, but Poe is, I would wager, beyond fashion. Author Neil Gaiman has said. It's a smart wager. So the mystery of Poe's death becomes an enduring part of the wonder that he is the most alive writer in the world today. Never mind the clunky dying words attributed to him by Moran. The line that best suits his last moment in Baltimore is one he gave the title character of Morella. I am dying, yet shall I live. Thanks for watching. As always, my goal at Booksmart is to get a little bit smarter, one book at a time.